Hello friends, and welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be talking about Joseph Joe Tinker. Joseph Joe Tinker is a Hall of Fame shortstop for the Chicago Cubs. Started playing with the Chicago Cubs back in 1902, played all the way through 1916. Joseph Joe Tinker is a very important figure here in Orlando. Why? He was the culprit of bringing what is now known as Tinker Field. Tinker Field was used as a spring training venue for the Brooklyn Dodgers, Cincinnati Reds, and also the Minnesota Twins. Joseph Joe Tinker ran a business here in downtown Orlando, where I'm going to be showing you the historic, which is now a historic building. I'm going to show you that. I'm going to also show you where he lived, and I'm going to also show you his gravesite. Another important fact is that Tinker Field was also used as the venue where Martin Luther King held his first and only speech in Central Florida. And I'm going to show you that here in Orlando, and I'm very excited to get started. I invite you to come join me. Let's go have a wonderful day. The building that you see me here standing in front of is what's known to be the Joe Tinker's building. Now, this building was built in the 1920s boom. I believe it was built in 1925, and this is where Joe Tinker ran his real estate business. And let's go ahead and take a look at the plaque that's here on the building. So yeah, this building here was built in the 1920s. It is now registered as a historic site. And let's go ahead and read the plaques. It says here, Tinker Building was built in 1925. And then also here on this plaque it states, the Tinker Building is listed in the National Register of Historic Places for Joe Tinker's contribution to sports and commerce. And what they mean by contribution to sports is that we're gonna go ahead and pay a visit later on today at the site of where the historic Tinker Field was built. And it also continues to say Joe Tinker's played shortstop for the Chicago Cubs for 15 years, 1901 through 1916 to be specific, as a leading National League fielder and a member of the famous Tinker to Evers to Chance, which there was an actual poem written because of those three, which I'm going to go ahead and play right now.
These are the saddest of possible words. Tinker to Evers to Chance. Trio of bear cubs and fleeter than birds, Tinker and Evers and Chance. Ruthlessly pricking our gonfalon bubble, making a giant hit into a double. Words that are heavy with nothing but trouble. Tinker to Evers to Chance.
So yeah, it does state league fielder and member of famous Tinker to Evers Chance double play trio. Tinker helped the Cubs win the World Series in 1906, 1907, 08, and also in 1910. He also played for the Cincinnati Reds and the Chicago Federals, retiring from professional baseball in 1921 to manage the Orlando Tigers. That's when he moved down here and he actually built Tinker Field. Tinker Field is named in his honor. Joe Tinker was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1947. As a matter of fact, he was inducted the same year his other partners, Evers and Chance, were inducted. So that was pretty cool. And then the Tinker Building was built in 1925 for Joe Tinker's real estate office and was restored in 1979. History also states that in 1926, there was a big hurricane, and also the Great Depression caused him to lose most of his fortune. Not to mention, in 1927, Tinker was sued by his business partner, Joe Pitts, and lost the court battle and had to pay. So obviously, you know, he was going through a lot of situations here. As a matter of fact, he was also known to be arrested for having a gambling house here in Orlando, Florida, where he also had a bar back in the Prohibition days. So Joe Tinker, you know, he got into some things, but I just love the fact that this building is still here. Built in 1925. This is at the historic downtown Orlando, which obviously you can watch some of my other videos. Last video I made on Saturday kind of showed some of these buildings, particularly that one and actually this one over here. And you know, we kind of dated back to when these buildings were made. But yeah, here is the historic Joe Tinker building. Ironically enough, and I got the Joe Tinker building behind me, ironically enough, back in the day, before Joe Tinker played for the Chicago Cubs, he was also offered a contract by the Cincinnati Reds, which he actually ended up turning down due to his friend Jack McCarthy stating that he was mistreated by the Cincinnati Reds. So he decided to play for the Chicago Cubs, and consequently enough, he also ended up playing for the Cincinnati Reds. So pretty cool, interesting fact. But that's kind of like a little bit of the life of Joe Tinker. And I'm gonna go drive over to where Tinker Field was built and show you a little bit more information about that as well. And here is a picture of the iconic and legendary trio of Tinker, Evers, and Chance there as they played in the Chicago Cubs. But the poem that was written about them was from a diehard San Francisco Giant fan, and I believe it was due to a triple play, or a double play I should say, that this trio did against the San Francisco Giants. And I hear someone crawling behind me, but San Francisco Giants, you know, the guy was heartbroken and he decided to make a poem. But on this corner over here, and let me actually show you a picture of, there is Tinker, the subject of this video here. There's another picture over here of him there, the Chicago Cubs back in the day. But over here in this corner of Lucerne Terrace and Ernestine Street lived Tinker with his wife on at 809 Lucerne Terrace, which is over here in this direction. But another interesting fact about the life of Joe Tinker is that his wife actually put a pistol to her head and shot herself, committed suicide on Christmas Day of 1923. So that is a very interesting fact. I believe Joe Tinker was married 3 times. I believe after his wife committed suicide, he then married another lady, and then after her, another one. But at this location over here was where his home was located, which was his wife's home, which he moved into. But it was located over here in 809 Lucerne, and obviously it's no longer here. They ended up building this parking lot. But I'm assuming, and I'm only assuming, that this building over here has been here since then. I mean, it looks very, very old. I'm sure this building was here back in the day. This was the neighbor of Joe Tinker back in 1923 when his wife committed suicide. And this is so cool, just kind of walking around this area here, seeing some of the historic buildings, even though some of them don't have plaques, but you can tell right off the bat that they've been here for a long time, particularly this one here. And this looks like it's an apartment building, but it's been here for a long time, friends. But yeah, this over here, which is where Joe Tinker lived, 809 Lucerne Terrace, obviously no longer here. And here's a little information on what's called the Baseball Stat Lexicon, also known as the Tinker to Evers to Chance, which is a poem from 1910. And it states here that it was a poem written by Franklin Pierce Adams. And it says the 8-line poem is presented as a single rueful stanza from the point of view of a New York Giant fan watching the Chicago Cubs infield of shortstop Joe Tinker, second baseman Johnny Evers, and also first baseman Frank Chance. Complete a double play. These 3 players helped the Cubs win 4 National League championships and 2 World Series from 1906 to 1910. So that is the poem right there, written by Frank Pierce Adams. Standing here where Tinker Field used to be, they made a nice dedication after they demolished the building. And you can see a lot of stuff here that gives you some information as to who played here in Tinker Field back in the days, in the 20s, all the way through 1990, I believe they demolished this. And you can see over here, National Baseball Hall of Fame managers and executive who played at Tinker Field. You can see some names like Sparky Anderson, Tommy Lasorda, Earl Weaver, a lot of famous names, Connie Mack. Over here, you can also see National Baseball Hall of Fame first baseman that played in this field, Rock Carew, Lou Gehrig, my friends, amazing. Stan Musial, Eddie Murray. Wow, amazing, amazing. Over here, let's walk over here. They have a plaque of right fielders who played here. Hank Aaron, Roberto Clemente, Andre Dawson, Reggie Jackson, Sam Rice, Dave Winfield, a lot. Look at that. Babe Ruth, Frank Robinson. Here they have a dedication placard. This is another location. This is the location where Martin Luther King had his Integration Now speech. Right there. This memorial is dedicated to the memory of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his commitment to unify society of love, respect among all people. And it goes to state that on March 6, 1964, during his only visit to Central Florida, Dr. King attended an SCLC workshop at Silo Baptist Church in Paramore. And then he came over here, stood on the pitcher's mound, and did his speech. Very cool. Here you can also see National Baseball Hall of Fame center fielders that played here. Kirby Puckett, Mickey Mantle. Very cool. Duke Snider. Then you also have Clark Griffin, 1869, lived all the way through 1955. This memorial is dedicated to the memory of the late Clark C. Griffith, who brought the Washington Senators to spring training in Orlando, Florida in 1936. Very nice. And then there's some more information plaques here. The end of an era right there. March 30th, 1990. You can see the field there. Minnesota Twins, held their spring training here. So did the Cincinnati Reds. Very nice. Players who played here: Herman Killebrew, Roberto Clemente. Very nice. On March 20th, 1955, a young Roberto Clemente stepped onto Tinker Field for the first time. The Washington Senators led the Pittsburgh Pirates 2-1 in the 8th inning when rookie Clemente drove in the tying run with a double. The Pirates ended up winning that game 4-2. Very cool. Legendary players played here. Jackie Robinson, very legendary. Montford Irvin. Very cool. Babe Ruth. Look at that. In what Sentinel called Orlando's greatest baseball holiday in history, Babe Ruth and American League champion New York Yankees took the field against Cincinnati Reds at 3:30 on Thursday, March 1927. The much anticipated day was celebrated as Babe Ruth Day across the city. So cool. And then, of course, you got Joe Tinker. Very nice. Let me also point out some of the National Baseball Hall of Fame third basemen that played here. One of my favorites, Wade Boggs, George Brett, Chipper Jones, Eddie Matthew, Brooks Robinson, Mike Schmidt also played here. Very cool. I'm assuming these chairs are from the original stadium. Very nice. Very nice. Very, very nice. And then over here, there's another plaque. Stays here. Catchers. Famous catchers who played here in Tinker Field. Johnny Bench, Yogi Berra, Roy Campanella, Gary Carter. I mean, just very, very famous name. Joe Torre. This is so cool. And then you have pitchers. Let's look at the pitchers here that pitched on the pitcher's mound where Dr. Martin Luther King had his speech. Steve Carlton, some names I recognize. Don Dystrell, Dennis Eckersley, Bob Feller, Whitney Ford, Bob Gibson, Trevor Hoffman, Sandy Koufax, Jim Palmer. Wow. Don Sutton, Bruce Sutter, Warren Spahn, Tom Seaver, Nolan Ryan, Robin Roberts. Incredible list of names that played in this stadium here. Very cool. And then to kind of close it off, we can start off. This is kind of like the era as it progresses. This is the 1890s historic Tinker Field here. You can see some players here from the late 1880s, spring 1895, 1910. Here's Babe Ruth Day, as it is stated there on the plaque. Here they are playing. That's what the field looked like. Very, very nice. Very cool indeed. It's got Ted Williams right there. Mickey Mantle played here. Here's a picture taken at the Silo Church right down the street here on Martin Luther King. You also have the stadium right here. Hank Aaron, Johnny Bench. Here's Cal Ripken Jr. with his dad. There's Chipper Jones there. Somebody doesn't like George Bush. Very cool. And then, you know, that's obviously before they demolished it. Very cool. Back in 2010. This is so cool. A lot of history here, folks. Definitely, if you're a fan of historic locations, if you're a fan of baseball, definitely this is a place that I recommend you coming. Tinker Field, Orlando, Florida. Just kind of making some calculations based on this photograph that you see over here. This is probably where, around this area over here, was where the pitcher's mound was at. And it is said that Martin Luther King made his speech right off of the mound, facing in this direction to the grandstands. So around this area right here, and I kind of lined it up with a little piece of grass over there, with this right here, and then also you can see in the photograph right here, it's hard to see in the photograph, that building right there, it's kind of lines up to somewhere around here. So right around this place is where Martin Luther King actually stood and said his speech. Not to mention a lot of the baseball players who threw out their first pitch and, you know, the pitches during the game. But this very spot right over here, somewhere around this spot right over here, the famous Martin Luther King made his speech. This is what the baseball field looked back in the day. And again, we're standing, I'm going to say, in the very close proximity of where the pitcher's mound was. And you can see over here, there's the stands over there. And obviously, things have changed tremendously. This baseball field was actually here since 1914. And in the 1920s, Joe Tinker built what is now known as Tinker Field. And this stadium over here, Camping World Stadium, was expanded, and they actually took a big chunk of right field. And that's the reason why they demolished the field. And it is a historic site, but because of it not being used for quite some time, and then the expansion of this stadium here, they just decided to kind of demolish the whole stadium. You can see here another photograph of where the baseball mound was, the pitcher's mound was, and how there was actually some, you know, you can still see right field completely there. And at one point they were stating, I read that this stadium was actually larger, this baseball stadium was actually larger than Yankee Stadium. And then I also love how they left the foul pole, the original foul pole, here. Very, very cool. That's the original foul pole there. Very nice. Tinker Field, folks. It's kind of very windy. It looks like it's going to rain. But before we leave here, I want to go ahead and read the information plaque. Like every other historic location, there's an information plaque. And this one reads, Joe Tinker, 1880-1948, was an Orlando real estate developer and a professional baseball player. While playing with the Chicago Cubs from 1906 to 1910, Tinker won 4 pennants, 2 World Series championships, and was part of the famous double play combination, which we've spoken about, Johnny Evers and Frank Chance, right? He managed the minor league Columbus Senators until 1919, and just goes on to talk a little bit more about the stadium and how teams, including Cincinnati Reds, played here, Brooklyn Dodgers had their spring training, Washington Senators, Minnesota Twins, and so forth and so on. And then on this side over here, it gives us a little detail on Martin Luther King. On March 6, 1964, Dr. Martin Luther King gave his Integration Now speech. And it goes on to, talk a little bit more about that. It states here how Babe Ruth, Jackie Robinson, Hartman Killebrew, Ruth Rockaroo, Lou Gehrig, Warren Spahn, and all other players that we saw plaques on today played on this field. So cool. All right, friends, now that we got to take a look at Tinker Field and what it looks like now, let's go ahead and take a drive to Joe Tinker's gravesite. I'm going to be showing you that as well, and that's where I'm going to end my video. Another interesting fact about Tinker was that him and Evers were actually involved in a fist fight during a baseball game, to which they ended up not speaking to each other for some 33 years, until one day in 1938 for the World Series, they were invited to comment in the booth as, I guess, color commentating. And neither of the two knew that they were going to be working together for that World Series. And so that's when they actually, made amends to their disagreement, to their fight, to their fist fight for that matter, out on the field. But you can see over here, this is a nice park, very tranquil. I can hear a lot of birds chirping. You can hear crows. You got this kind of lake over here. I love that it has this little bridge over here, so it's very tranquil over here. But yeah, that's another interesting fact. These two, which you're talking about the shortstop and you're talking about second baseman, which have to have a good relationship, right? They're tossing the ball one to another all the time. Not to mention they were a very famous, they're probably the most famous triple play trio in all of baseball history. And so they ended up having a fist fight. They did not talk for 33 years. They were invited to color commentate in the World Series of 1938, which was actually between the Chicago Cubs and the New York Yankees. And they made amends. But over here in that direction over there is Greenwood Cemetery. This is where Joseph Joe Tinker was actually buried. And we're going to go ahead and visit his gravesite over in that direction. And folks, here's the gravesite of the Hall of Famer Joseph Joe Tinker, which, as you can see over here, was born and died on his birthday, which was July 27, 1948. He was born in July 27, 1880, and he was also buried, I did not know that, he was also buried with his wife Ruby, who committed suicide on December 25th of 1923, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. And there's a plaque here that says, famous as a member of one of the baseball's greatest double play combinations from Tinker to Evers to Chance, a big leaguer from 1902 through 1916 with the Chicago Cubs and Cincinnati Reds and the Chicago Feds. Manager Cincinnati 1913 and Chicago National League 1916. Shortstop on the Cubs team that won pennants in 06, 07, 08, and also in 1910. Now, Joseph Tinker died of complications of diabetes, and he actually had his toe amputated, and it continued to progress until he actually, had his whole leg amputated, and then obviously died from diabetes as well. But you can see here some decorations, some baseballs there. And he was actually buried here next to his wife, and there are other members of the Tinker family that were also buried here. You can see here, son of Joe Tinker, Roland Rowley, died here or was buried here in August of 1980. Then some other family members. But yeah, this is the gravesite of Joseph Joe Tinker, Hall of Famer, Chicago Cubs, also a very legendary figure here in Orlando. Very cool. Died right here, or actually buried right here. Very cool. All right, friends, today we did a lot. Not only did we go to the historic building where Joe Tinker ran his business in downtown Orlando, we took a drive over to where his house was. We also took a drive over to the stadium where Tinker Stadium was, where legendary players like Lou Gehrig, Babe Ruth, players like Roberto Clemente played, Jackie Robinson. Amazing, amazing. We also got to take a look where the pitcher's mound was, where Dr. Martin Luther King once did his speech on his first and only visit to Orlando, Florida. And we got to see the graveside of the Hall of Famer, Joseph Joe Tinker. If you like this video, don't forget to smash the like button, consider subscribing, and I'm going to end this video like I always do. We came, we saw, and we conquered. And do me a favor, have a wonderful day. Peace!